How long does it take to prepare a sermon? Does it take an hour? Does it take 2 hours? Um, I've been working on it for almost 20 years since I got saved. It'll be 20 years on the 22nd. So, almost my 20th birthday as a Christian. So that's how long I've been working on this sermon. And those messages, understanding God's word. Now, it is good to be able to put together and have some sort of a structure here. But yeah, no, we should do some of that sometime. Anyway, we are in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16, and verse 10. We're going to read verse 10 through 15. And we're looking at habits of wise people, how to have that wisdom, and looking at what do wise people do. And if I want to be wise, I'm going to walk like the wise people walk, talk like the wise people talk, and think like they think. Uh-oh. Okay. Talk like a wise person? You might be a wise person. All right. So, Proverbs 16, verse 10 says this: "A divine sentence is in the lips of of the king. His mouth transgresseth not in judgment. A just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work. It is an abomination to kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness. Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him that speaketh right. The wrath of a king is as messengers of death, but a wise man will pacify it. In the light of king's countenance is life, and his favor is as a cloud of the latter rain." I want to look here at a wise person's understanding of leadership and how they approach the concept of leadership, of how to lead, but also how do you relate to leaders. And every wise leader understands everyone's a leader, but they're also a follower. We all have followers. And I want us to see in this verse three concepts of leadership that we need to understand if we're going to be wise, if we're going to work and operate in God's world as God would want us to. And the first principle of leadership that wise people understand is that leadership is God's idea. Okay? Leadership is God's idea. Leadership did not evolve by, the pack of apes that had an alpha ape that could guide the rest of them became stronger and more aggressive and conquered, and then they evolved this concept of leadership by survival of the fittest, and leadership exists for wiping everyone else out and being the strongest. That's not how leadership started. Okay? Where is the first instruction of leadership given in the Bible? The first words that would indicate that somebody is being given authority over someone or something. Okay. Adam was told to name the animals. That's the first, his carrying it out, but actually the first mention of that is a little even before that. So we're talking Genesis 1, Genesis 2. Well, he named all the animals, but when the plan for man was made, before Adam was formed in Genesis 2:7, we'll God from man of the dust of the earth. But in Genesis 1, verse, verse 26, the Bible says, "And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion." Okay? Dominion, that means leadership. That means authority over. This was in a perfect world, a world that did not have sin, a world that did not have death, a world that did not have survival of the fittest. Was that first authority put there. Now, this was authority delegated Because the Creator, by virtue of the fact that he created, does he have authority? Yeah. He has all authority. And if he delegates that authority to someone, is it because that person then has authority because they're the biggest and strongest? No. They have authority because the one who had the authority gave it to them. And we've been given the authority as a race, as mankind, to have dominion over the earth, not because we know everything about earth science and we know how to make it all work right, but because God said, I want you to do it. Okay? And when we recognize that leadership and that basis of authority was given by God, okay? Now you have a little ways later, then you've got Adam and Eve, and then you have sin. There's another level of leadership kind of given. I mean, Adam was there first. It doesn't actually say before the fall that he had authority over his wife. But after the fall, God says, unto the woman I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Okay? This wasn't necessarily a punishment, but this is God saying, hey, this world has changed, and in the institution of a family, we need to have authority. And so God said, I am putting the husband as the authority in a family. Okay? Not because he's smarter, not because he's stronger, not because he's bigger, but just because God said that's the way I want it to be. Then you go down further. After the flood, God gave authority to mankind to execute capital punishment for murderers. Okay? The institution of human government. That was God's idea. Okay? And God had to, not that God had a bad idea, man loves to mess up God's good ideas. Man said, hey, let's have one world government. And God said, that's not going to really work well because you're just going to do whatever you want. You will be your own definition of what is right and what is wrong. Okay? Remember that because we'll talk about it here in a couple verses. If man defines what's right and wrong, we determine what our ultimate morals are. We're not taking that authority down from God. And we're not operating under the authority that God has given us. Okay? If ever we step out of the bounds of the authority of the one who gave us the authority, we no longer have authority. Okay? It'd be like if a captain in the army was telling his soldiers to do something, and he's like, yeah, I know our general told us not to do this, but forget that. I'll take my rank off. You're just going to follow it because I told you to. Okay? Well, as soon as he says, I'm not following the orders of the general, does that captain have any more authority? He's gone. He's out of the command chain. Okay? So, like, if a husband says, I'm not going to care what God says, we're doing it this way. I mean, now, you don't have to have a good leader in order for you to be a good Christian follower. That's a different lesson for a different day. But if you don't follow in God's chain, you lose that authority. And when a government, the one world government of Babel, was not following God, they weren't spreading out and replenishing the earth, and they were building a tower into the heavens. Many people think that it was like some sort of temple, a ziggurat, and maybe with signs of the zodiac on top, I don't know. God split it into all these different nations. And God said, you're going to have these different nations. And he establishes those. And throughout, when you see kings instituted in Israel, centuries, maybe not quite centuries, but a few centuries, generations before there was a king. So in the time of Moses, because after him was Joshua, and then the judges. Hey, I do know my order of the books of the Bible. trying to. And there's a lot of generations in there where they did that was right in their own eyes. There was no king during any of that time. Yet Moses, God had Moses write out, here is the code of conduct for a king of Israel. Now, you're not going to have a king yet, but when you do, this is how he needs to behave. And so God has these rules, and leadership is God's idea. And look at this verse here when it says, and I'm back in Genesis, sorry, verse 10, a divine sentence is in the lips of the king. His mouth transgresseth not in judgment. What is that meaning? Because there are lots of civil wars fought over this verse. Okay. King James, who gave us this, authorized this, his son, King Charles, had his head chopped off over an argument about this verse. Okay? Because this book, this Bible, without any commentaries embedded in the text, there was another English Bible in circulation before 1611. It was the Geneva Bible. It was very Calvinistic, but also it was very anti-divine right of kings politically. Now, King James and most of the monarchy of the time, they loved this verse. I mean, this is like, boom, put this on my throne, put this on my scepter. I can say whatever I want, and I'm right. Right? A divine sentence is in the lips of the king. If I say it, it's like God said it. Remember this context to everything, right? But we need to understand this. And a wise person, when they look at a king giving his sentence, a divine sentence is in the lips of the king, his mouth transgresseth not in judgment. When a king is doing his job, he's got to make a call. It's going to be a tough call. I heard an evangelist do a message on the issues in life. He read through a bunch of Leviticus. It was all the codes about how the priests are supposed to deal with people who have leprosy, or if there's leprosy in a garment or this. And it says, and if the spots seem yellowish, brownish, it puts ish in there a bunch. And if it seemeth to be deeper than the skin, and if it's this, then the priest is just supposed to make this call and say, you are banished for life. Or, no, you can stay here. Oops, I was wrong. Now the whole town dies. Big decisions on something that is an ish. Okay? It's hard to make that decision. But here's the simple 7th grade summary in my theology here of this verse, okay? What does this mean to us? A divine sentence is in the lips of the kings. His mouth transgresseth not in judgment. Here's the simple application. Do not argue with the ref ever. Period. Do not argue with the ref. Someone's got to be there to make the call. God's idea was for there to be this position called the leader. And it's going to be a tough call, and people aren't going to agree with it. Okay? But a wise person is going to say, you know what? That person is in the position as the ref. I'm not going to argue with the ref. Okay? Now, you say, well, what about when the ref is wrong? Hasn't there ever been kings who've been wrong in their sentence? Okay? There were some French kings and nobles who used this verse to do some horrible things. And they say, well, you know what? I'm divine. I can do no wrong. I'm a king. No, that's not what this verse is saying at all. Because look at the next verse. A just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work. So, yes, God has put leadership in to be able to be the ones where the buck stops there. They got to make a call and people got to follow it. But God is still the absolute moral standard.
That was reading that. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, yes.
Has to
Oh, yes.
be right and just know that he's done the best of his ability to do the right thing. You know what I mean? And as looking at the king, you just gotta say, yeah, he did the best he could, and just try, you know what I mean? And as I just read that, it's like, yeah, he's a king, and he just gotta believe that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's, and I just think it's more than, because if they're wicked, then, you know,
If they're wicked, they're going to be,
they're not, you know, I mean. if-
they're
if
cutting
they-
out their legs from under themselves, is what it comes down to. But here's the big picture, okay? God delegated this authority, and there's a lot of other Bible verses that support that. The powers that be are what? Ordained of God. God has put them there, okay? In Romans chapter 15, now I'm trying to remember, it's 15 or 13. Paul really very clearly talks about, hey, we need to follow the authorities. And he's writing to the Christians in Rome. Okay, there's some bad kings there. Okay? Let me,
Well, you know, I'm gonna.
yeah, go ahead.
Sake of discussion, I mean, Peter and the boys who got thrown out of prison, they were just saying, don't you ever preach the gospel again.
Okay.
Hey, are we gonna listen to man or God? You know, that was the guy. You know, so I'm not discounting any of what you do.
No, not at all.
So anyway, and they say, hey, we're gonna preach the gospel because God says.
So, in a structured chain of command,
I'm not,
if there is an issue with a superior, what do you do? Well, what do you do if there's an issue with a superior in the chain of command?
usually not gonna follow that.
Okay, so you're a sergeant in a company, and the captain just gave an order to go into a village and shoot everyone. Okay, you go up the chain of command. Okay, here's where a lot of people go wrong. They've got a problem with government, they've got a problem with the king. They start going laterally in the chain of command. They're like, hey, you're with me, right? Yeah, you're with me, right? You're with me, right? Let's just, all of us, jump this whole ship of the chain of command, and we're going to rebel against our authority. Well, hang on. Your authority comes from God. If the king is not following that, you appeal to God. And this was really some of the people that seemed the most hesitant to sign on the Declaration of Independence, yet were some of the most ardent supporters of liberty when they did. This was the struggle they had. They said, God put me in England as an English citizen. Am I violating God by rebelling against my king? When they came to the conclusion that our authority is God, king is in that chain of command, we're going to appeal to God. And that's exactly what it says in our Constitution. We're going to appeal to him. He's the one who's going to decide this. Okay, that's what that declaration, it was an appeal over the chain of command. That's what that document was. And when we have a problem with the king, we need to go above. We do not go sideways. That is insurrection. That is sedition. That is rebellion. That is not the way you do it. Okay? Because authority is God's idea. And it's not that a king can do no wrong, but the authority that king has comes from God. And the appeal is to go to God. You don't go to another king. You don't go to some other organization. You don't go to mob justice. You go to God for the appeal. And, wise people, if we just, we could just, on those first two verses there, okay, don't argue with the authority. How many people wouldn't get fired if they just listened to that verse? It's like, he's the boss, but it's a bad idea. It would work way better if we did it this way. He's the boss, okay? When you're the boss, you do it that way. It's just that simple, but he's the boss, you do it the boss's way, right? Now, if it's something that's absolutely a violation of a standing order from higher up, okay? When we've got a standing order from higher up, when Jesus sat down with his disciples and said, okay, here's the deal. You need to understand this. All power, all authority in heaven and in earth is given unto me. Okay, I have absolute supreme authority. Go ye, therefore, and teach all nations. Okay, the commission under the power of the most absolute authority. And now here's another authority that they're there. Hey, this is the authorities of the people saying, do not speak about Jesus. Again, it's like I have a direct standing order from the commander-in-chief that I must do this. In this case, respectfully, sir, I'm not going to follow your order. Okay? And that's what they did. They appealed to, I cannot carry out that order that you've given me. That is a violation of what we are. You don't have the authority to change that order. Okay? And it's respectful. It's not rebellion. It is following a chain of command, because wise people understand this wisdom. Now, this is wise people following wisdom, following leaders, okay? Understanding I can appeal to God, but don't argue with the ref, okay? All right? Don't argue with the ref. And, if in a sports game, is there a proper way that an appeal can be made to the ref? The coach can walk up to the ref and can appeal something, right? If a player starts yelling at the ref, what do they get? Okay, they get kicked out. Okay, and we need to follow the right way of appealing it. Now, that's if we're a follower understanding wisdom. Now, if we are in that leadership, if we are the kings, okay? Look at verse 12, and he was just talking about this, okay? It is an abomination to kings to commit, I'm looking at Romans, and like totally in the wrong chapter here. It is abomination to kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness, okay? Their throne is established by who? Who set up this idea of the throne? God, right? So to them, if they do anything to shake the righteousness of God, they're shaking the foundations of their own throne. Okay? And a wise king recognizes that. It's like, but I can have more power and more pleasure if I just jump over and do this. Yeah, but my throne is established by righteousness. Okay? Oh, but I can get these people to betray each other and turn each other in. It's like, okay, if you have a nation of traitors, what are they going to do to you one day? They're going to betray you. One of the most hazardous jobs in the Roman Empire was that of the Roman emperor himself. I don't think they could have gotten a life insurance policy. It's like, we're just elected emperor? Yeah, your policy is canceled immediately. Okay? They had a short life expectancy. There was the year of 4 emperors. It got to one point where each new emperor, he became emperor by sending promises to the Praetorian Guard. This would be the secret service of Rome, saying, if you kill the emperor and bring me in, I'm going to raise taxes and give you guys all a raise. Hey, that sounds good. Boom. Dead emperor, new emperor, taxes raised, they all get a raise. Nice. Then they get a letter the next month from somebody else. Hey, they raised you guys 20%. How about 30? Sure. Boom, dead emperor, more taxes, new emperor. Okay, how secure is that? Where you're in a palace guarded by these guards who you bribed to kill the person who bribed them to kill the person who was in your seat before that. How safe is that? Okay? But hey, I'm emperor, at least for a day before I get stabbed. Those who had an established throne, they did it by righteousness. Okay? The kings who had a long reign. David had a reign for 40 years. Solomon had to reign for 40 years. Okay? It was established by righteousness. Okay? It wasn't a cruel tyrant. Okay? Those people didn't have reigns that lasted very long. Okay? Say, well, they got the power and everything. Their power is established by righteousness. Why is it that the Soviet Union crumbled? Okay? That model doesn't work. And it still doesn't work, no matter where you try to put it. Righteousness has to be that foundation, and a wise leader understands that. And because they realize how much integrity is the core to their leadership, okay, I do like the fact that every branch of service, the military service, their core values includes integrity. They recognize that. Hey, righteousness, doing what's right, that is the foundation for leadership. Okay? And they get that idea from God. They didn't come up with that. That came from God. And a king recognizes that. And then it's so much so is that wickedness is an abomination to them. They understand that their throne is established righteousness. When they hear someone speaking righteousness, it's just such a joy to them. There's another verse that says, he that loveth pureness of heart, what did it say? Something of his lips, the king shall be his friend. It's just someone who wants to have a pure heart, wants to do right. Their speech is just going to be so encouraging. The king is like, I want you around me. I just like it when you talk. You're not trying to bash things down or you're just speaking righteous. And it says righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him that speaketh right. Right? A wise leader, when they get someone in who's going to speak right. Now, there was someone who hung around Israel who wasn't always rooting for David, but he spoke right, and David always listened to him. And that was the prophet Nathan. And he came in, and he pointed his finger at the king's face and said, thou art the man. The king listened to him. That's a wise king. There was another king, centuries later, same area, who a prophet came in, one that Jesus claimed to be a greater prophet than Nathan, a prophet by the name of John the Baptist, pointed his finger at the king and said, it is not right that you have your brother's wife. This is not right. Okay? And the king was kind of scared because he was like, okay, I understand my throne is kind of established in righteousness here, and this guy's telling the right thing. You can't really chop his head off for being right. He's like, I'm going to throw him in prison. I don't know what to do. But his brother's wife is like, I know what to do. I'm going to trick you with my daughter dancing some seductive dance to get you to chop his head off. Okay? I don't know that there was a whole lot of righteousness undergirding the reigns of the Herods, and they did fall. Some of them, very publicly with worms and all that. And one of them was almost persuaded to be a Christian. But a king recognizes, you know what? I don't like what you said, but I know it's right. I know it's right. And a king will appreciate righteousness when it is spoken, even if it's by an enemy, by a political opponent. A king who says, I'm not going to listen to you guys at all. Never. That's not wise. He needs to listen to righteousness. Now, last thing you understand is that a king recognizes is his power. Okay? We recognize the authority comes from God, and he is still the supreme authority. We recognize that it is rooted in righteousness, that the ability to lead is when it is founded in righteousness. If he decides to found his kingdom not in righteousness, he just stepped out of the chain of command. He is a rogue. He's like, well, no, I'm the king. People need to follow me. No, you're a rebel. You left the king. You are the rebel. living in unrighteousness, okay, you're going to be judged by the king. And those people who use the twisted version of the divine right of kings during the Middle Ages to commit all sorts of atrocities, they're judged by God. Okay? They are judged by God. Now, people who go the other way, who they said, no king, no king. We don't want any king. Kings don't have any right and authority. The Puritans, they won the war for a little while, sort of, for a few days. But they didn't actually appeal in righteousness to God for it. And they had this general named Oliver Cromwell, who became a much worse dictator than the Stuarts ever were. And they hurt themselves. And we need to understand we appeal the right way. But last thought here, in the last couple minutes, here, the last two verses. It says, the wrath of a king is as the messengers of death, but a wise man will pacify it. In the light of the king's countenance is life, and his favor is as a cloud of the latter rain. Kings are powerful. Leadership is powerful, whatever level of leadership that is. If we're talking about the leadership that mankind has over the planet, the dominion that man has over the earth, that's powerful. If we're talking about the authority that a husband has in his home, that a father has, that parents have with their children, the authority that a supervisor has with his employees, the authority that a king has over his nation. All of those authorities have power. And it says here that the wrath of a king is as messengers of death. Now, anytime a leadership authority, especially if they're rooted in righteousness, when they get righteous indignation, okay, the messengers of death start to go out, right? Now, if it is a boss at work, he's going to be issuing out orders. People are going to be doing stuff now, changing things, or changing who's working there, right? If it's a king of a nation, well, if things need to be changed, as in the head of that department needs to lose his head, that can happen. Or maybe just metaphorically, the department loses its head and that person's fired and we get somebody else in there. But that wrath, when a king, and this really you understand, leaders are humans and they have emotions. Okay? Listen, one of the reasons you don't want to argue with a ref, do you really want the ref to be mad at your team for the rest of the game? That's just dumb. Okay? That's just asking for another bad call. It's like, man, there was that one bad call. We tried to argue over it, and then the ref kept making bad call after bad call after bad call. Yeah, you ticked him off. Okay? You challenged the ref in a bad way, and he's going to throw the book at you. Okay? I watched a football game. My friends were playing a high school football game against their rival school. And the only football game I've ever seen where in one play there was 60 yards of penalty. All right? Unsportsmanlike conduct. And then that triggered some more unsportsmanlike conduct, which triggered some more unsportsmanlike conduct. 20-yard penalty each time. And, that league didn't have any more of that level of unsportsmanlike conduct for the rest of the year. All the teams they played, they heard that, and they're like, oh, these refs aren't kidding. But, if you're working at a job, don't get your boss mad just for the sake of getting them mad. That's a bad idea. It says, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, because we need that instruction. The children, don't provoke your parents to wrath. That's just a no-brainer. Bad things will happen to you if you provoke the leadership to wrath. Okay? It's just, don't do it. The wrath of a king is as a messenger of death, but a wise man will pacify it. Okay? A wise coach knows how to, oh, the ref is getting angry now. I need to calm the ref down. If the ref is going to be calmed down when he sees that my people are all sitting down, that my assistant coach is sitting down and shutting his mouth, then I'm going to do that. And I've seen some games where the head coach had to, you sit down. No, I'm not talking to the players. Assistant coach, sit down. Stop talking. You're making the ref mad. I've seen some games where the ref told the assistant coaches, you need to sit down, only the head coach is allowed to stand. You don't want to be doing it. The wise person knows how to appease the wrath. And a wise person, if the king is angry, he knows how to calm him down. Okay? They understand that. And then, just as destructive as that power can be, and it needs to be, because when judgment needs to happen, okay? There are times that God, as king, poured out his judgment, and it needed to happen. Sodom and Gomorrah, the flood, okay? The Amalekites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, all these nations that would sacrifice their children to Baal, they needed to be judged. And God judged them. And a king, there's times when the king needs to make a divine sentence in his wrath and judge against the wickedness. That has to happen. A king that won't do that, he's not being established in righteousness. But the flip side of that is also true. It says in verse 15, in the light of the king's countenance is life, and his favor is a cloud of the latter rain. Okay? When a king has his countenance towards something, he says, yes, this is good. This is a good thing. His favor is as the cloud of a latter rain. Now, a king can't actually make it rain. During the Dust Bowl, President Roosevelt did a auto tour of a lot of the areas that were affected. And it just so happened that a wet front followed him. They called it the Roosevelt rain. They're like, he brought the rain. This is awesome. He didn't really bring the rain, but he certainly capitalized on it. But when a king does look at something favorably, it is like that rain that comes in right when you need it to get the harvest to that point of peak perfection, that latter rain that comes in. And in our nation, if the president or the governor or the mayor or sees something and he delights in it, can he make that industry or that place flourish? Sure. They have that power, and that's their job to do that, is to see what needs to be lifted up and exalted and do that, and what needs to be put down, and they need to put that down. That's the job of leaders. It's not an easy job. But wise people understand, hey, if that wrath is coming my way, drop everything to appease that wrath, okay? That needs to be taken care of first before anything else can happen. And I'm going to respect this. Now, if he is operating outside of God's chain of command, I appeal up. I'm not going to appeal out. Okay? Christians want to sit around a room and complain about their government. That is absolutely sin. Okay? It is. It's absolutely sinful. We should be appealing to God, not trying to make a group of grumblers. Okay? Because when we're doing that, guess what? We're stepping out of that authority that God put in as well. Right? Now, we happen to live in a nation that is of the people, by the people. If we don't like the government right now, run for office. Vote. Okay? We actually have freedom to be able to influence that. Christians who sit around and complain and then don't do that, I don't know what to say. But we need to understand leadership is something that God put. We need to respect leadership, respect the positions of leadership, understand where it fits in the chain of command. Right? We are all in the chain of command. We all have authorities over us. We're all under authority, and God is that ultimate authority. Okay? He's put us under God. He's put us in nations. Okay? There's nobody who's not of a nation. We've all got nations. He's put us in families. There's a separate, it doesn't take the place of a family, but there are churches, and God did put authorities in the church. If you're working a job, you've got authority there. God put you under that authority in that realm where you're at. There's authority. If you get on a public road and you decide to drive, you're under the authority of the police because you're running the risk of other people by doing it, and you've got to follow that authority, right? And we've got to respect that, understanding that all that authority comes from God. If there needs to be appeal, it needs to be to God. And when we're in that level of leadership, we need to build it up with righteousness. Don't build it with just power and threat and everything. Okay? By the way, husbands, fathers, in the home, your authority is built up on righteousness. It is not built up on the fact that you're the biggest person. Okay? All parents, mothers, fathers, your authority comes from righteousness. Older siblings, your authority comes from righteousness. And we've got to build the authority on that. And then use that authority for good. Let it be like the clouds, the rain, the latter rain. There is so much good that can be done with leadership used the right way. The church needs leadership in every level. It's not just one person in leadership. There's a lot of leadership that needs to be done in a church. And we need leaders. There's never going to be too many leaders as long as they all decide to line up behind God. Okay, if one of them wants to be, hey, I want to be a leader outside of the authority chain of God, that's going to be a problem. But if we're under God, there will never be too many leaders in the church. Okay? And we need to support that and understand God's plan for it. So let's be wise leadership, wise in respecting the leadership, and wise as leaders when we follow that. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for your goodness. I thank you for establishing for us your righteousness, establishing for us the structure of leadership and authority, and the fact that we can always appeal to you. No matter where we are in the chain of command, we can trust in you, and that if we follow your word and build up in righteousness, Lord, you establish the leadership and you establish the position and the ability to do great and important works, whether in judgment or in favor. Lord, I pray that you would help each of us to grow as leaders in the areas you put us, and I pray that we would lead people to you. And I pray you get the glory for it. In Jesus' name, amen.